A place in the heart of Germany. Suddenly, disaster strikes the tiny village on the banks of the river Saale. And from this day, nothing will ever be the same. It strikes the single father and the young woman. A young mother with her baby, and the family with lots of children. Thousands of years later, their fate will attract worldwide attention. There are no witnesses and no written records. What happened on this dramatic day in Eulau, close to the site that saw the discovery of the mystic Nebra sky disk? Anyone hoping to make great discoveries in the heart of Europe has to take to the air. A bird's eye view offers the best chance of recognizing any traces of the past. The Earth never forgets, says Harald Meller, as he searches for conspicuous patterns on the ground between Naumburg and Halle on the Saale, ancient settlement sites. On this particular day, unusual patterns in a field near the village of Eulau catch Harald Meller's eye.
They look like grave pits.
The 4 circles on the ground could well be prehistoric burial sites. An archaeological team is alerted and immediately sets to work. But what it will find is still very much in the dark. No one has any idea of the sensational find the excavation is about to uncover. Today, the Eulau site is regarded as one of the new millennium's most significant archaeological discoveries. Site director Robert Ganselmeier intently monitors his team's well-rehearsed routine. To preserve the evidence, every detail counts. Bones are uncovered. Human bones. Several skeletons lying close together. Without any doubt, it's a burial site, and the care with which the dead have been laid to rest is quite remarkable. 2 men, 3 women, and 8 children. Did they die from natural causes, fall victim to disease? Or was there a more violent reason? It soon becomes clear that some kind of atrocity has taken place here. It is an extremely atypical, mysterious find, and it leads the archaeologists to take an unusual path. In the Museum of Prehistory in Halle, the experts arrive. Their task? To solve the mystery of the 13 skeletons using professional methods, the latest technology, and a healthy dose of intuition.
Mr. Ganselmeier, the police would say you have uncovered the crime scene. Can you tell me how many bodies were found there and explain what happened?
Yes, altogether 4 graves were uncovered, with between 2 and 4 people in each one. So a total of 13 individuals altogether.
Mr. Meyer, all the victims in these graves have injuries which seem to originate from a violent struggle.
That's right. In each grave, there's 1 or more individuals definitely showing very clear signs of inflicted force. Here's an arrow tip. Here you can see again in more detail that the arrowhead really is sticking in the spine.
There were also injuries to the skulls.
There is a child that was beaten to death, a woman that was beaten to death, and 2 men show clear signs that they tried to defend themselves.
Inspecting the crime scene is a standard procedure for criminologists. But for BKA profiler Michael Baumann and anthropologist Christian Meyer, this is not quite what they're used to. The nature of the burial indicates that this discovery is thousands of years old. But what is actually known about the people who lived at that time? A massacre at some time in the dim and distant past. The investigation team's chances are not good. The very idea of finding perpetrators and motives would have been a mere illusion until recently. But the methods of modern archaeology and criminology have advanced rapidly. Up to now, depending on age and quality of the bone material, investigations all too often failed at the very first question: when did the crime occur? To determine the victim's time of death, a bone analysis is required. Protective clothing and disinfectants are used to prevent the samples from being contaminated. Only then can a fragment of a rib be delicately removed and sent carefully packaged to the laboratory. At Kiel University, the complex procedure begins of examining the piece of bone to unlock one of its greatest secrets, its age. Cleaning and grinding the sample are among the basic skills required. The Leibniz Laboratory for Radiometric Dating and Stable Isotope Research is a world leader in its field. Despite all its high-tech instruments and equipment, at first sight, the lab is more reminiscent of an alchemist's workshop. Step by step, the analysis is prepared. The ground bone is deep frozen in liquid nitrogen, rendered gaseous through combustion, sealed airtight, and then pressed into an aluminium capsule. The multiply modified bone sample is now placed into a so-called mass spectrometer. Here it is bombarded with cesium ions.
They're all within 100 years. The results are good, and that means they're about 2,500 years before Christ.
The dead of Eulau were alive around 4,500 years ago, in the middle of the 3rd century before Christ. For Europe, a period of change. Many tribes were searching for new settlement lands. Indigenous peoples were being marginalized and displaced. Conflicts were commonplace. This was happening in central Germany too, with its rich, fertile land and salt deposits.
What can you tell us about this 4-man grave here?
That's the grave we observed first.
This is the artist's impression of it.
It's a moving image. Is this a father and mother watching over and embracing their children in death? At Mainz University, DNA analyses of the remains are to clarify the relationships precisely. And they deliver a spectacular yet chilling result for Professor Alt and his research team.
We carried out a kind of paternity assessment. To do so, we examined the 2 children, the man and the woman, and were able to determine that these 4 individuals are in fact related. That means we now have the proof that we're dealing with the oldest nuclear family that has ever been discovered.
It's a worldwide sensation. The oldest family ever discovered in human history was found buried in Eulau. The first thought is, if a nuclear family is found interred so tenderly, they must have been buried by people who were extremely well acquainted with them. But who had buried this family and the others so affectionately? The killers would at best have buried their victims hastily to conceal the deed. But here, all indications suggest a solemn burial ceremony. So who were the people who mourned for the dead of Eulau?
When you think about the crime scene, you get the feeling that it happened in the confines of a village. They weren't cut down by bows and arrows. The first was hit by one, but the others suffered blows to the head with battle axes. Can the events be placed chronologically at all?
Yes, we should definitely try to do that. I would guess that the woman being hit by the arrow was one of the first attacks, carried out from distance. Then we have the hand-to-hand combat that followed. That immediately throws up the question, was there a village nearby?
We've discovered settlement land in the immediate surroundings, so that means we can assume there was a village here.
The inhabitants of Stone Age Eulau had long ceased to be primitive cavemen. They lived from agriculture, cultivating grain, and breeding cattle. Bones found around their settlements were mainly of goats and sheep. However, for these people in the heart of Europe, written communication was unknown. So archaeologists have named many illiterate cultures after their typical pottery forms. For some generations, the so-called corded ware people had been living on the Zala and Elbe. Their forefathers came from Eastern Europe, and they were given the name because they impressed twisted cord into the clay of their pottery before it was fired to create decorative patterns. The first craftsmen provided a certain prosperity. They are masters in the production of stone axes and knives. The flint stone blades are extremely sharp. And even dolls already have a place in the lives of these people. In the warm seasons, a life of abundance may even have been possible. The forests are then full of animals for hunting and provide a source of high-protein nourishment for the villagers. At that time too, the safety and well-being of their children was paramount for these people who already lived in small family units. Murderous attacks were by no means commonplace at that time, at least that's what the experts believe. So the sudden disaster that struck Eulau must have been so much more surprising. One by one, each skeleton is carefully uncovered and documented, bringing to light a mass of information. For instance, the women lie with their heads to the east, the men to the west, but both genders are facing south. This removes any doubts about which tribe they belong to, as each one buried their dead in accordance with their own rituals.
This is definitely corded ware culture, as you can see from the grave offerings. That's clearly the axe there, and over there, very important, is the meat offering. Oh yes, the meat offering, I can see that.
A piece of meat for the journey to the afterlife. Drinking vessels. The grave offerings confirm the religious beliefs the victims lived by. No doubt whatsoever, the 13 dead belong to the immigrant culture of the corded ware people. And then the climax, the battle axe. The male status symbol follows into the grave. But who snuffed out their lives and why? There are still no clues to suggest who may be responsible.
Mr. Baumann, what is it you have to deal with? What kind of violent cases?
Well, in cases of murder and violent death in Germany, the perpetrators mainly come from the close social environment. Look at the headlines. Mass murder out of jealousy. That's typical for the kind of thing that happens here. Or here, for example, bride, groom and wedding party brutally murdered. This shows that the especially serious crimes here are committed by members of the family, by relations, acquaintances from the neighborhood.
Is that also conceivable here in our prehistoric case?
Well, we start by examining the different hypotheses and various alternatives, and then ask the question, do the perpetrators come from the close social environment or from much further away?
This seems reasonable. An emotional crime within a personal relationship. A fight between neighbors or relations, at a wedding perhaps. Since time immemorial, reasons for hatred between clans and inhabitants of neighbouring villages have been abundant. A classic case of blood vengeance also seems plausible. Or was it pure jealousy? Experts assume that relationships were often the root cause of bloody feuds even then. One wrong word at the wrong time and the situation can often escalate into deadly violence. A relationship problem within the social circle, a clan massacre, is the explanation that seems most likely.
This is a fantastic, quite extraordinary burial. You can see he's quite a big man.
But the pieces don't quite fit together. There is one remarkably odd factor. Quite obviously, the 13 dead are only one part of the village population. There are no young men, no warriors. Where were they when this incident occurred? The case seems so extraordinary that the archaeologists take a very costly decision. All the skeletons and the earth around them are removed as one large block. In the museum laboratory in Halle, the scientific examination is intensified with the help of an international team of experts. A precise analysis of the circumstances is now intended to achieve the breakthrough.
This is where the attack begins. Here there's some kind of house-to-house fighting, and then we have the bodies in the village itself and possibly in the houses too. However, an interesting question is, why are there no traces of animals' teeth on these bones?
Quite right. If they lie there longer than a day, it's reasonable to assume that dogs will at least gnaw at them. So within a few hours, or at least within a day, their own people must have come back and buried the dead.
The experts are now certain the victims were laid to rest by their kinsmen. There is absolutely no evidence for someone from the village having massacred 13 neighbours. Consequentially, the solemn burial ceremony was surely a moment of sorrow and grief for all involved.
You can almost feel the shock, the tragedy and the grief when you see how the hands of father and child are intertwined and how mother and child are lying face to face.
This is very symbolic. Those burying them knew the relationships.
If no one from their own village community had committed the murder, the neighbours from surrounding villages inevitably come under the investigators' scrutiny. Throughout the ages, envy and greed, major driving forces for human activity, have always released criminal energy. But what form would any such raid take at this time in history? Would it be an attempt to kidnap young women? Women and children being so brutally murdered suggests it was no ordinary raid. The experts are having doubts. Perhaps death came from much further afield, suddenly and by surprise.
From an archaeological point of view, it's also possible that we may actually be dealing with Bell Beaker movement for the very first time. Horsemen belligerently conquering and taking possession of parts of the land, and certainly not without bloodshed. Those would seem to be the scenarios. An issue between two tribes of the same culture group, or possibly a new foreign culture trying to gain a foothold.
For the hunter, it may have been a summer's day like any other. Luck seemed to be on his side. Things are going well for the other people of Eulau too. Their grain stores are plentiful. No one suspects that on this day, death is approaching. The hunter too is unsuspecting. Who are these people, these unknown horsemen? The inhabitants of this entire area are supposed to be working in their fields. But these people are strangers. Their appearance here does not bode well. If they were traders, they would have stopped at the village and offered their wares. The hunter from Eulau has never seen such people before. Neither such clothing nor such drinking vessels. Their beakers have the appearance of bells. They carry disturbing weapons. Their bows are a strange curved shape. And they know how to use them, as the meat on the fire shows. The horses too are impressive, battle-hardened, just like their masters, who ride them hard and fast. The hunter immediately realizes there's no time to lose. A horde of strangers is approaching. The entire village is alarmed by the news. The strong men and youths immediately run for their weapons. The battle axe was typical for the corded ware people. Now they have to move fast. Have the horsemen already approached the village without being seen? Have Eulau's defenders set off in the wrong direction? Two men remain behind. The potter and the hunter don't head out into battle. They are to stay in the village and protect the women and small children. So, besides the relationship and robbery theories, we now have a third conceivable scenario. An attack by a foreign tribe. How did our hunter lose his life? An examination of his skeleton should provide the answers. The remains of the giant man contained in the plaster cast block. With him lie the skeletons of two children. The experts begin to examine his injuries.
The sheer size of this man is alone very impressive. He was just under 6 feet tall, which was very unusual at that time. We can put the age roughly between 25 and 40. It's also interesting that he has traces of old wounds as well as more recent ones. On the left arm at some time in his life, the lower end of the forearm was broken, as was the wrist. That's quite a massive injury, practically severed the arm. Perhaps this man had already been involved in fighting. At the same time, on his other arm, the right arm, there's a fracture which probably occurred around the time of death.
Everything points to the father having defended his children till the very end. It must have been an unequal struggle. Two men are no match for their fiercely superior attackers. Very suddenly, they must have been upon them, perhaps from a completely unexpected direction. Among the victims is a woman who had given birth to her third child shortly before. The baby and its siblings are also killed. The giant of Eulau and his children do not survive either. Neither the experience nor the courage of this battle-hardened man were any help against the superiority of the attackers. At least, that's the way it seems from the perspective of a later millennium. There is no doubt about one of the weapons used. One of the dead women had been hit by 2 arrows.
Mr. Meyer, what happened to this woman? Can you explain that to us? Yes, fortunately we can determine the exact cause of death. We can see one vertebra with an arrow tip, which has penetrated that vertebra. You can only see the shape of the arrow tip, and from the front you see that it had a cutting edge rather than a real point. It depends on the strength of the bowman and the strength of the bow itself, but we can say it was probably from no great distance away.
The vertebra with the arrow tip is removed from the skeleton and taken to the clinic in Halle, where a powerful CT scanner stands ready for an unusual examination. It is hoped the doctor in charge can provide certainty about the nature of the arrow tip, without having to damage the bone. The result, however, is inconclusive. Did the tip break off on impact, or is it a hunting arrow without a tip?
You can see in this animation that the arrow tip has penetrated deeply into the vertebral body. The arrow must have gone right through the body for it to stick in the vertebra.
The expert's conclusion is that the projectile was launched from a powerful bow. But who had been the bowman?
Mr. Ganselmeier, criminologists extrapolate from the murder weapon, from the projectile, to the murderer.
Yes, we know the weapon is an arrow, so we decided to examine all possible arrow-like projectiles.
Who was in possession of such weapons and arrows? A new clue from Spain provides the scientists with an interesting lead. It comes from a Catalonian research team in the coastal mountains of the Costa Brava. Far away from Eulau, a long since disintegrated mass grave conceals the evidence of a bloody battle at the end of the Stone Age. 200 men lost their lives here in ferocious combat. It was a terrible bloodbath. The archaeologists were able to recover hundreds of arrow tips, whose origin can be determined unambiguously. The discovery also allows conclusions about the great effectiveness of the weapon used. A bow with such enormous penetrative power that its arrow strike impact made the tip break off in the bone. Could this be an identical projectile to those used in Eulau? At the end of the Stone Age, there was only one people infamous for such a highly developed weapons technology: the Bell Beakers. Where did they come from, these mysterious warriors of a culture that expanded, apparently unstoppably, across vast areas of Europe in the 3rd millennium BC? In Portugal, a German researcher has been putting together the evidence for a surprising line of argument. In the Archaeological Museum of Lisbon, Dr. Kunst is certainly no stranger. He himself unearthed some of the items exhibited here. In this high-security display cabinet, the splendid jewelry of a warrior elite is kept. A unique arm guard of pure gold. Important for bowmen, it protects the forearm from the impact of the released bowstring, and this one no doubt belonged to a Bell Beaker prince. Such spectacular discoveries were made by archaeologists in the southwest of Europe. Here they also discovered an impressive fortress with mighty walls. Dating these finds brought a sensational result. The fortification at Castro of Zambojal was built 5,000 years ago. Was this the ancestral home of the Bell Beaker people? The German-Portuguese excavation team is looking for indications of what the wealth of Zambojal was based on. Measurements taken off the walls confirm the unprecedented dimensions for fortifications in Western Europe at that time. The excavation team repeatedly finds such tiny items. It is copper slag, residues of metal smelting.
Christian, can you measure this one?
For Michael Kunst, the answer is clear. The source of Zambojal's wealth is the smelting of metal on a large scale. The Bell Beakers were familiar with the techniques of smelting and working copper, something largely unknown in Europe at that time. This knowledge had come from the Near and Middle East. Did the Bell Beakers themselves come from Asia Minor or even North Africa? Precious Bell Beaker pottery from Portugal was unearthed by archaeologists in the Bretagne. Golden jewellery from northern Spain found its way to England. Such transports would only have been possible by sea. But also on horseback, the Bell Beakers forged their way ever deeper into the heart of Europe. from Spain via France and Switzerland to Eulau. But were these mounted bowmen with their far superior weapons technology, whose origins lay on the Iberian Peninsula, really responsible for the massacre at Eulau? For the merciless slaying of defenseless villagers? The Eulau case is developing into a Stone Age murder mystery of pan-European proportions. From Stonehenge in England, new research results arrive that throw a different light on this mysterious murder drama on the River Zala. Harold Meller has left the panel of experts in Halle to go and investigate the new findings. This discovery, made by an archaeologist friend of his, has caught his attention. Joshua Pollard informs him of the astonishing results of his current research. For Pollard, there's absolutely no doubt that the Bell Beakers also had a hand in the monumental restructuring of the sacred Stone Age site. For the archaeologists in the vicinity of Stonehenge, it's a theory that stands to reason. Andrew Fitzpatrick also believes the Bell Beakers had considerable capabilities, as he explains to his visitor from Germany. What finally convinced him of their special role was a spectacular grave discovery very close to Stonehenge.
We can say that this knife came from a long way away. It's from northern Spain, and this is one of the objects that the archer may have picked up on his journeys along the Atlantic coast. So it's almost as if part of the story is about prospection, going to new places, looking to see where copper and gold can be found.
But it was the isotope analysis of the Amesbury archer's teeth that revealed the real sensation. This prehistoric traveller must have been born in the Alpine region, in southern Germany or Switzerland. A fascinating idea. 4,300 years ago, a man sets off on a journey from the Alps to England, through inhospitable forests and across the sea, constantly in search of new metals, copper, tin, and gold. Today, archaeologists know that the Bell Beakers evidently did not arrive in Britain as an invasion of murderous hordes, but as small elite groups. The man from the Alps, too, was carrying convincing arguments to back this up. Splendid jewellery, and above all, the new wonder material, copper. And he also knew how to work it. The reputation for omniscience may even have preceded him. He may well have been the one to bring the knowledge of this precious metal to England. In Stonehenge, Joshua Pollard can even present a brand new archaeological theory to his visitor from Halle. It's now believed the monumental stone circles form the sacred centre of an ancient burial ground.
Human burials which have been found on the site, cremation burials, but also other pieces of human bone.
The master plan behind this restructuring of Stonehenge is astonishingly reminiscent of the cult of the dead in ancient Egypt. The two scientists are in complete agreement on this. In the heyday of Stonehenge, the empire of the pharaohs is at the zenith of its power. On the edge of the desert, enormous tomb monuments are constructed for the ancient Egyptian kings. Along a processional avenue lined with columns, the priests accompany the dead pharaoh to the sanctum. From the pyramid, his soul should rise up to the eternal light of the sun. What the rulers on the Nile dreamed of achieving was immortality and even deity. In Stonehenge on the River Avon, Joshua Pollard has meanwhile discovered remains of a temple and a processional avenue. It ends at the shrine of the sun god, the centre of the cult of death. Harold Meller is electrified by the discovery. Were the Bell Beakers the heralds of a religion with ancient Egyptian roots? Quite obviously, they didn't only bring their lethal weapons with them to the north, but much more so, a Mediterranean worldview. The evidence suggests as much. Near Magdeburg, not far from Eulau, an enormous circle was discovered. This is Germany's Stonehenge. Shortly afterwards, excavations begin in the meadows on the banks of the Elbe. A young scientist is the on-site director of the project Bimmelter Circular Ditch Enclosure. Between the remains of long since decomposed wooden stakes, items from the end of the Stone Age can be found, probably left there as offerings. Was this place a festival site or a burial ground, like Stonehenge? A computer reconstruction is to provide the final clarification. Professor Bertemes and his research team are meanwhile very close to finding an answer. Laboratory analysis on the Pimmelter finds reveal their age, 2,300 years before Christ, shortly after the last restructuring of Stonehenge. This puts it at about the right time. A computer helps to determine the alignment of the circle in relation to the course of the celestial bodies at that time. A ritual site for the cult of death and the rebirth of life. Possibly a place of reconciliation between former enemies. Between Bell Beakers and corded ware people, united in a new faith?
We believe today that this state of peace and this understanding gave rise to those outstanding cultures of the early Bronze Age that created the Nebra sky disk.
One thing has become quite clear. The Bell Beakers brought progress to Europe. They did not come as rampant conquerors. This would tend to rule them out as suspects in Eulau. The solution had seemed so close. Now new facts are needed. Something has been overlooked. Does the secret lie in the victim's teeth, perhaps? For the newly developed isotope analysis, the teeth from all the skeletons are extracted and sent to the prestigious University of Bristol. In the West Country City's Archaeological Institute, one by one, the teeth are cleaned carefully. Because information on the dead villager's journey through life is contained in the enamel. The radioactive isotope strontium occurs all over the world in water, but in very different concentrations. With every sip of water a child takes, an amount of strontium very specific to its own environment is ingested and deposited in the teeth enamel as long as the child is still growing. This amount, similar to a fingerprint, defines the region in which a person grew up. A fascinating method. Could the victims' birthplaces provide new evidence for the Eulau case?
The result on Eulau is very interesting because it shows the children and the males were all local. They all lived somewhere very close by to where they died. However, the women come from somewhere else. They come from a region that has a very different geology for the local geology to Eulau.
What is the next region?
Well, I think the closest region that could have this kind of strontium signature is probably in the Harz Mountains.
It's a very exciting lead. All the children and both men in the graves are definitely from Eulau, but all three women come from somewhere else, presumably from the Harz region. The men obviously got their wives from some neighboring tribe outside their home region, and that didn't always end peacefully. Was it a forced marriage or even the kidnapping of women that triggered the Eulau massacre? And then a new red-hot lead. Perhaps just intuition? The investigation team subjects the fatal projectile to another thorough examination. The arrow tip, which is still embedded in one of the victim's vertebrae, is very carefully detached from the bone. From the previous X-rays in the clinic, the nature and shape of the tip couldn't be seen precisely enough. Archaeologist Norma Litursky now examines the tip under a microscope to be able to assign it to a specific tribe. Who was it that shot this arrow? If it wasn't the Bell Beakers. The projectile has clearly not been made with a point, but deliberately angular. Neither is it smooth and fine, but coarse and rough-edged. This considerably narrows down the circle of suspect tribes. Then the surprising result. This is an arrow tip from the so-called Schönfeld culture. At the time, they were the only people still working flintstone in such a coarse manner. And yet another surprise. The Schönfelders settled in the Harz region, where in all probability the Eulau women also came from. A plausible motive. All too often, women were a pivotal factor. They brought fresh blood into the village. Sometimes they came voluntarily. Sometimes they were kidnapped. What remained was the hatred of those left behind. The arrow analysis is only a few days old. For the research team, it's the final breakthrough. Now, after 4,500 years, the image of the killers from the Harz region emerges clearly. Harold Meller finds yet another indication, thus confirming his colleagues' research results. The Schönfelder type of stone axe fits precisely into the fractures of the skulls found in Eulau. Without question, the women played a key role in this Stone Age drama. Their fateful, probable links to the attackers point to what criminologists today call an emotional relationship crime. But one thing it certainly was, even 4,500 years ago: a brutal mass murder. The 13 dead of Eulau, fathers, mothers, and their children. Among them lies buried the oldest family ever found in the history of mankind. Did they die because there were those who could not bear them being together? We will never know for sure, but the evidence suggests it's more than likely.